I would like to thank all of you for inviting me to this gathering of some of the most committed people on the planet. Committed not just for their self-interest, but for humanity and for the cosmos. We are at a point of transition in human evolution when humanity itself is passing through a crisis, the likes of which it has never seen before. Depending on what we do or don't do, life itself might survive or not. And the situation is so precarious. And the solution before us is not political, is not economic, is not social, is not institutional or organizational or systemic. It is a crisis of consciousness. And therefore the solution is of consciousness. And a change, a radical change in consciousness, not an incremental change. We've reached a point where the human rationality, which was so prided by us, has failed us. And there is something deeper, something more true, which needs to come forward and lead the journey ahead. It is this which, in our approach to education, we see in the heart of every child. It is this which we seek to nourish and assist in its own spontaneous and free emergence. And it is this that we as educators have to become conscious of within ourselves. Otherwise we cannot see it in our own children. It was 100 years ago that Sri Aurobindo articulated these ideas, and he was a contemporary of Dr. Maria Montessori. It is interesting to see many common alignments of dates. She was born 2 years before Sri Aurobindo, 1870. Sri Aurobindo was born in 1872. She passed away 2 years after Sri Aurobindo. He was in 1950 and she in 1952. They both began to write of their educational ideas around the same time. Sri Aurobindo in 1906, and I think the first book of Dr. Montessori came out in 1907. And later, when during the Second World War, at the beginning of the Second World War, when she came to India, she stayed in Madras for 6 years at the Theosophical Society. It was barely 150 kilometers away from Sri Aurobindo, who was in Pondicherry then, at the Sri Aurobindo ashram. And obviously there was connection, and there were many connections in fact. Some of the early followers of the Montessori system in India were all freedom fighters. They were all closely connected with Sri Aurobindo. They were the elite of Indian society who were drawn to these wonderful ideas and organized their execution nationwide. And Sri Aurobindo in 1906, when he wrote his concepts of education, it was because he had entered the freedom struggle to free India from colonial rule. But the goal he set himself was not a political freedom only. He said, we fight for freedom for India not because the British are good or bad rulers, but, and this is the grand vision we have to place before us, he said, but because humanity is passing through a great transition where India has a crucial role to play. And before India can play her rightful role in human affairs, she has to discover her soul. And in order for her to discover her soul, she must be free. Therefore, we fight for India's freedom. So it's not just a political freedom which was won in 1947, and you can see the mess which has followed subsequently. That was not enough. And so he articulated a framework of education for a national education for India. He left his work, which was very high paying, with the Maharaja of Baroda, and became the principal of this national college in Calcutta to implement this education. But of course, all these ideas were still premature at the time, when humanity was still bound to the fascinating attraction of what I have always referred to as the industrial system of education, which is born in an industrial age where the whole thinking is industrial, where everything is seen in terms of a factory and a model of production and a mass production. So school itself was designed for creating workers for the industry. And the children are seen as raw material. The teachers are the machines operating on the raw material to shape them, chop them, cut them, twist them into shape, to prefixed, pre-designed parts. You need a lawyer, you need a doctor, you need an engineer, you need a whatever. In a society which is itself a gigantic machine, where you have to fit in, replace cogwheels which have worn out. And this was the industrial mindset. And I'm going to highlight this aspect of the mindset, because finally, it's not what you do with all the good intentions and with all the right actions. If you have not changed the mindset, you will warp the outcome completely. And this is the experience in India for the last 50 years, that there have been attempts by the government to bring about changes in education. All the good efforts get twisted because the mindset behind was never changed. And this mindset was so overwhelming in that period, and Dr. Maria Montessori also fought against it, struggled against it, that these things worked, but they remained always small islands. And later Sri Aurobindo's work extended subsequently. He had to leave the freedom struggle, he shifted to Pondicherry and worked for the deeper spiritual awakening. And that is the base for the Sri Aurobindo ashram, where I grew up. It was in 1943 that the school was established in the ashram, when children from the Second World War as refugees came there. And then again there was contact between Dr. Maria Montessori and Sri Aurobindo, and the mother, who was from France, who was jointly founded the ashram with Sri Aurobindo. I will come to this towards the end of the session, because there's a very interesting correspondence which I would like to share with you. So it is in such a school that I grew up. And all of my education fortunately was there, and you will see certain similarities, deep similarities. I grew up in a school where from kindergarten through to graduation of college, we have no exams. And that alone makes such a huge difference. And the teachers are all residents of the ashram. None of them are paid. They are not doing it as a career. They do it because it's their children. And so we have classes which are about 8 students to a teacher. And especially when we reach college level, the students can choose their own teachers, their own subjects, set their own framework of the curriculum. And at that point, sometimes you have 1 or 2 students to a teacher. And that's acceptable. You have all the teachers available, you can pick who you want and work with them as you like. And so there's a whole framework which has been developed, which Sri Aurobindo wrote about, as I said, 100 years ago, and which was described as an integral education. Integral because the goal is an integral development of the personality. The methods used are integral, and the perspective, the whole approach and the understanding of the child is also integral. And I use the word integral as distinct from holistic. Holistic means that takes into account the whole, but the whole can still be a cluster of pieces. Integral has a very specific sense that all of the whole is aligned and organized around the center, integrated around a center. And what is that center? In the industrial education, we look at the child as raw material. But in the integral education, we see the child, first of all and foremost, as a soul in evolution. And just that one shift changes everything, including our relationship with the child. Because not only the child is a soul in evolution, we also are souls in evolution. From its highest perspective, we would say the soul even chose its environment. because it had already a sense of purpose. It chose an environment conducive to the line of experience that it wanted. And it comes innate within it with the knowledge of how to develop that experience and the impulse that drives it through to fulfill that experience and realize it. We ourselves as souls in evolution are in no way superior or inferior to the children. We are friends. We are children with them. We are all part of one gigantic collective evolution and awakening taking place in the whole cosmos, not just on Earth. And so our relationship with the child also undergoes a huge shift, and the nature of the interaction. And you can see all of this is not new to you, but it is the way we approach and the context, the framework set, which you will find complementing, perhaps even supplementing or even identical with what you have learnt. And then Sri Aurobindo describes, and he uses the vocabulary of the system of yoga in India, where we observe the framework of the human personality. Around that soul, there are layers. Layers of, let's say, material, substance, through which the soul acts into the world. And so we call them koshas, layers, sheaths, literally translated. And there is first the mind sheath, and then the life energy sheath, and then the physical body substance sheath. But they are meant to be instruments of action in the world, but as they grow, and if they grow with hardening and darkening, they become concealers of the soul's action and the soul's influence. And if early on, especially very early on, we are able to bring the right alignment, then these sheaths can grow to become instruments and even conscious instruments. Unlike what we see in most of the world today, where they completely cover the light of the soul. And the approach of education takes, Sri Aurobindo describes, 3 principles of true teaching. And he articulates them thus. These are in the tradition of India. We have this word called sutra. You're familiar with this concept. A sutra is a very pithy, brief formulation of an entire ocean of knowledge experience, formulated in a single. The word sutra means thread. So it's like a rolled up thread. It's a little thing you can slip in your pocket, but when you unwind the thread, it goes on and on and on, reveals so much. So when you meditate on this simple statement, formulation, sutra, you can draw out of it a huge experience, an ocean of knowledge. So they are articulated as 3 sutras, 3 principles of true teaching. And the first principle of true teaching is that nothing can be taught. Nothing can be taught. And so we wonder, what are we doing here? The reality is this, that you can attempt all you want to drill knowledge or experience into someone's mind, it's not going to happen. The only way it can happen is when that thing awakens within the person. If you observe the whole process of learning, I'm a little worried that I don't want to go too deep into these things because we will use up our time quickly, but I'm going to try to make a balance. If you observe the learning process within us, if somebody tries to explain it to you, yes, you try to understand, but notice what happens. A part of you leans into the other person and identifies with what they are feeling, what they are thinking. And in that moment of identification, something clicks and you say, I get it now. It's sudden. It's not something which enters you and works inside you. Rather, it's an identification where you are leaning into the other person and identifying. And the moment there's a click of identification, you catch it. You were the learner. Or the other way, somebody is trying to explain and you're trying to find it within yourself and you don't see anything aligning with what they speak of. And somebody else, often it's your own classmate, who sees differently than the teacher, who leans in and says, you know what, look at it this way. And you shift your perspective and click, there's a revelation, you see it, I get it. Now that moment is a moment where you recognize you already knew it. the experience, the knowledge was already within you. You just didn't know where it was, and now you turned and you saw it and it came forward. There is no learning except a discovering within ourselves of what was already there. And this is a very profound idea, and it goes to a deep knowledge which unfortunately is not yet recognized by modern Western psychology, which is still in an infancy. But it sees evidence for it and does not want to recognize it. And the evidence is that within us is an access to all knowledge. Under hypnosis, we are able to tap into all kinds of things which we didn't know we knew. For example, if you're asked how many times did you breathe since you woke up, I don't know, I didn't count. Your conscious mind did not count, but your inner subliminal consciousness, which is massive, infinite, is aware, and under hypnosis you're able to tap it. But it is in that infinite foundation of a universal consciousness, of which we are an individualization, it is in that infinite foundation that all knowledge already exists. And our process of learning is just an emergence of what was already innate. How we help to emerge differs. Either we go by an internal introspective process or by an external identification with somebody else's experience, or occasionally, and when the very skilled teacher can actually take an imprint of an experience and infuse it in another, awaken it by kind of a resonance in the other. And again, it can emerge within you because it was already there. So the whole approach to learning now shifts once we understand this deeper truth of things, that nothing can be taught, but you can create an environment for the emergence of what is already known deep within. And so our relationship as teachers changes. We become not teachers, but friends, guides, helpers, co-creators, co-discoverers, and our role is really catalytic, where we assist that emergence. But in that attempt, what is the right environment and what means can we use which will assist? And Sri Aurobindo points to two gifts of nature. Nature has an enormous interest in ensuring the growth of the child. In the worst case, it could be the child is in the forest, parents have been eaten by the tiger, and the child has to survive. So nature ensures that she has implanted in the child two special gifts which will ensure this development. And Sri Aurobindo points to them as our greatest helpers. And the first, I'm still discussing the first principle of education. The other two principles will follow. Now within this, we're looking at two gifts of nature. The first gift of nature is that every child has an insatiable curiosity. Observe that, encourage that, nourish that. As parents, we tend to do the opposite. When children ask silly questions, silly to our discomfort, where did I come from? Where does the sun go at night? Why doesn't the rain fall up? Whatever it may be. Why don't clouds fall down? It's a very good question. It starts a whole scientific discussion. We say, oh, don't ask silly questions. Ask your teacher. I don't know. Don't disturb me now. Can't you see I'm busy? And the child learns that he will not be loved if he asks these questions. And he learns to suppress that instinct. And then later, the teachers will complain when the child is 12 years old. Oh, children today, they are not interested in learning. That's not true at all. They're learning other things now because you stopped them from learning what they were interested in. But if we can nourish this right from the beginning, and sometimes we don't have answers, you can say, you know, that's a very good question. I don't have an answer to that. I've been wondering that myself. And you can start a discussion or have him initiate a process of inquiry and tell him, tell me when you find an answer, because I've been looking for this for a long time. But you set a relationship where the curiosity is going to be encouraged and triggered all the time. And just that one thing, if you have sufficiently developed it, your role is over. For the rest of his life, the child will find his own way. And it may be perhaps the experience for many of us here that we learned the most on our own and not in classrooms. And we learned best when we learned it on our own. And because that drive was there. So in the school where I grew up, Having removed exams, people ask, well, how do children learn? How do you motivate them? Well, we have removed the motivation of fear and reward. And so we can go to the real motivation, which is the joy of learning. And it is explicitly stated that we want to inculcate the joy of learning. Because every time we learn something, every time there's that discovery, there's an aha, I know it. Something lighting up, but with it a great joy. Because, and this again going to something very deep, which we discuss in the yogic tradition, that we are all children of immortality, is what they say in the Veda. Amritasya putra, children of immortality. And immortality is that consciousness of divinity, which is truth, consciousness and bliss. And our soul is really an emanation of that, a part of that, shares in that. And every time there is a discovery of new knowledge, it's a discovery of ourselves, of something deeper, there is always that burst of the joy which comes with it. And that joy is innate to our soul. It is the truth of our being, the truth of our existence. We are discovering something of ourselves. And that joy is so precious because it is causeless. It does not depend on anything external. It does not have an opposite. It is not in the domain of duality, where happiness is contrasted with sadness. What we teach children today, perhaps I'm digressing, but it's so important here. What we teach children today, to be happy, do this, do that, and you will be happy. And the happy is followed by sad, because the happy is a construct and dependent on circumstances, a product of a process which inevitably has to exhaust. It has to end. It's a state of excitement which tires the nerves, which will be followed by a relapse into the reverse, a sadness. But that delight which comes from the soul's innate being is not in the domain of duality. It is true, it is permanent, it is real, self-existent. And that joy, when you begin to draw nourishment from that as your primary drive, primary motivation, you go through all life, through all difficulties, and it's always there. You're happy. And it's the true sense of happiness. It's the happiness we seek, which cannot be corrupted. And so to make that the foundation of the motivation is the greatest gift you can give them. And so in supporting that curiosity and getting the children to begin to find that delight in learning is so one of the keys, one of the gifts that nature has given us, and one of the keys in our means in our interaction with the children. There's a second gift that nature has given, which is that every child is naturally a hero worshipper. Spontaneously, instinctively, we look for some symbol, some example of a hero, someone who we want to be like. And you'll see this continues through into adulthood, even in adult life. And I'll ask each one of you to look into your own life and see how there was one special teacher who inspired you. And to this day, you remember that one teacher when you have a difficulty. What would she do with this situation? What did she do with us when we were like that? And that becomes your reference. Of course, in the beginning for the children, it's the parents who are the heroes. And I will be like my mama, like my papa, whatever it is. My papa knows everything. He can do anything. You know, and all of these are reference points for me to become like. And the example we set is the mold into which they strive to grow. That's their only reference. But in the hero worship, notice there's something very deep happening. There's spontaneously an attempt to identify with that which you hero worship. And in the identification, you imbibe. Now here we're touching a very deep principle of learning again. That identification, the power of absorption through identification. All of us have it innately, we have not developed it consciously. But when we hero worship someone, something, then automatically we're identifying and drawing from there. And this is how children, with very little conscious input from us or effort from them, quickly absorb everything that's happening around them. Dr. Montessori speaks of this absorbent mind. But the absorbent capacity itself It's there as an instinct. What's happening during that absorption is some kind of an identification, some kind of an alignment through which we catch this. And so if we provide an environment which is nourishing, healthy, we set ourselves as the best examples that we could be, then that is going to be effortlessly transmitted and absorbed. Unfortunately, what happens? The father says, if so-and-so calls, tell him that I'm not at home. And the example I've set is, it's okay to lie when it's convenient or inconvenient. And at the same time, I scold the child, why do you lie? And so there's a conflict. But you will say, I'm not a good example. I have all my difficulties. I have my own limitations. There are two things you do here. You set examples, great examples from history, from mythology. And that's why those stories are so fascinating for children. They're uplifting. You set examples of an ideal. And even when an ideal fails, he struggles to overcome his failure. But the ideals, each one of them stand as powerful archetypes. And children very quickly catch that. And I myself, I set the best example by showing how at each moment I strive to be true to myself to the best of my capacity. I fail, I get up, I strive again. That is the example. The example that you don't give up, the example that you set yourself an ideal and struggle to reach it even when you have your own failings. I make a mistake, I abuse somebody, I get angry, I will immediately follow up and apologize as soon as I am conscious enough and in control of myself. And the child sees that I make efforts to correct my errors and so on. That sets the example, the best example for him. So we have set now two frameworks, curiosity and examples. And you can see how this can be extended very quickly in many different ways, including story narration, role-playing, theater, drawing, etc. All of this is helping us when nothing can be taught. And the first principle of true teaching defines now the whole environment of our learning process. We come now to the second principle of true teaching, that the mind must be consulted in its own growth. The second principle of true teaching, that the mind must be consulted in its own growth. Each child is unique, not only in the impulse with which the soul chose to take birth, in the line of development that it wants to, aspires to grow, but in the particular formulation, form and imprint of personality. You see, in the yogic tradition, we speak of two different aspects of our being. There is the consciousness within, going back to the soul, the pure awareness, and then there is the machinery of nature. We call it Purusa and Prakruti. And both have natural tendencies. I'll just briefly outline this. Within the soul and in the soul's impulse of aspiration, there are four facets in particular. They take four aspects in particular. All four must eventually be developed, but there is an impulse to knowledge, there is an impulse to leadership, to strength, to power. There's an impulse to harmony, organization, beauty, and there's an impulse towards perfection, skill in works, service. These are four different impulses of the soul's powers, one of which predominates in each one of us. Eventually, though, our maturing is in the development of all four and their integration into one continuous stream of four facets, perhaps. But this is innate to each one of us. And if you observe, you will see some of us are naturally drawn to knowledge. And those who are drawn to leadership, you will find you chose this domain of leadership through education because one of these predominates and the other is subsidiary to it. For some, it is the leadership first and then the education aspect follows. For them, it is education first and the leadership aspect through education, activism through education follows. Often, the more developed in humanity have two of these, one predominant and one secondary but developed. But the other two, if they are not sufficiently developed, you're always dependent on someone else in your team to fill in for those. And the most developed in humanity, those who can enter any space and be complete in their effectivity, are those who have all four developed and integrated. But well, we start where we are and we grow. But this is coming from the consciousness within. There is also something else which is in the nature within us, in these three layers of the mind, emotions, and the physical body. And the yogic system describes these in terms of three tendencies which are everywhere in us. Three gunas. Three guna, you've heard the term perhaps. Three qualities, so to say. There's first the tendency of inertia. Second, kinesis, and the third, illumination. We call it tamas, rajas, and sattva. I will avoid the vocabulary, Sanskrit vocabulary for convenience of people here. But the inertia, most felt in the body, is the tendency to just come back to rest and do nothing. And it's there in the body. It's there in the mind also sometimes. The mind does not like to make an effort. It wants to come back to rest and just be in a stupor. This tendency has a truth in it, which is the truth of a foundation of stability. You come back to rest what? In a state of stability. Now each of these has dual aspects. So this has to be corrected by the kinesis, the drive of rajas, activity. And so we force the body to do exercise, to run around, or we use the stimulus within the curiosity to get the child to explore and overcome the inertia. But that, exaggerated, can become restlessness, agitation. And so that is corrected by the sattva, the illumination, which brings the balance, harmony, right alignment, precision in the balance of things, just right, and always taking the middle path. This state of illumination is when you're conscious and you're able to choose consciously. But if illumination does not have sufficient support of the energy of activity, it falls very quickly into inertia. Now all these three are tendencies within us. In education, we try to remove the inertia, organize the kinesis, and increase the illumination. To the extent that we are able to do that, we have created in the consciousness, in the nature of the person, a state in which they are in charge of themselves. Otherwise, we are struggling against our own instruments. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. What do? Well, strengthen the flesh. And so on. So I'm just touching upon this to show that there is a whole complexity of the psychology of the human being, and we have to take that into account. And finally, it comes at a very practical level where we have to recognize that each child being unique, you have to refer to the child's needs, the child's interests, the current state of development of the child, and support that. In the Montessori framework, you see how simply this is done. You place before the children all the means. They find what is interesting for them. Now here's a very interesting clue when we observe the psychology of the child and ourselves as adults, big children. What is interesting for us now is that which currently in the development is the focus of nature's instinct. If you want to know what to do with the child, what should you give him? Observe what is interesting for him at this moment. That's the particular layer, the faculty which nature is developing. And to experiment with that, explore that, apply that is the most interesting activity. I'm going to digress a little bit and explore what is this thing called interesting or not interesting. Consider, you go to a certain program, let's say you went to a lecture or a music program, and you come back and say, wow, that was fascinating, it was so wonderful. And then you go to another, and you come back and say, that was so boring. What's the difference between the two? Essentially, in your experience, subjectively, what's the difference between the two? What made this interesting and that not interesting? You said? What is that?
Connection.
Connection, what did you say?
Attitude.
Attitude, yes. experience, yes. You see, they're all pointing to something very important. In the interesting one, I went in one person and came out a different person. I grew through that experience. In the boring thing, I went in one person, I came out the same person. Interesting equals growth. Growth equals interesting. Such an interesting idea. We just grew in insight. And so you notice in the child, he is interested when he is growing. He gets bored when he is not growing anymore. Or the reverse. You create an environment where there's potential for growth, he will be interested. But now there is growth and there is growth and there is growth. So when I went to my first party, it was very interesting. I went to the roller coaster, it was very interesting. I go a second time, okay, been there, done that. Third time, it's boring. So the things which can provide a very small incremental short-term growth of novelty only. But what do I grow from it in real, long-term, meaningful, lasting terms? Not much. And then there are other things where I can go there again and again and again, and each time there's something new. Something to learn, something to grow, something which I never realized before. Perhaps some of you have this experience when you read the writings of Maria Montessori. The first time you read it, you understood something, and the second time you read it, you understood something more. And after 10 years, you viewed the same text and said, my God, there was so much there which I missed the first few times. Yeah. Right? Because the content itself is rich, deep, multifaceted. It's emerging from a living experience, and the force of a multidimensional experience, it carries something deeper. Unlike a mathematics formula, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Oh yes, been there, done that, it's not changed. If you go to a lot of what is taught today in education in the conventional exam system, they're all simple fact-based responses. I know a fact, so what? Does it change me in any way? And one of the exams they had in India was, how many wives did King Henry VIII have, and name them? Well, what value does it have for my life? Are you asking me to have many wives? What's the example you're setting? What's the point of it? In Bombay, there was an exam at little children for kindergarten. It was an elite school, so they had an exam for kindergarten. And one of the questions, of course, there was name the Prime Minister, name your parents, name your address. And then there was a question, name that rotating object on top of an helicopter. What are you trying to do there? Of course, the result of these things, especially when you drill in mathematics in that form at an early age, before the mind is ready, is to damage the mind. And we all know that. There's a lot of research which shows how children who go to conventional kindergarten before the age of 3, they have damaged minds. They are less able in later years, and they are less confident, and they have difficulty. Dyslexia, in fact, is nothing but accelerated development where you skipped one of the stages of development. You see, the brain itself organizes along the lines of the mind in layers of faculties. And there's a particular layer of activation in which it learns to differentiate between symmetries, left and right. And if in the pace to speed up the handling of faculties which are too advanced, you skip this stage, I've gone on to the next faculty, now I can handle abstractions of numbers, but I have not yet handled the mirror imaging. And so, well, I still have problem with B and D, or 6 and 9, or whatever form it takes. And it's just skipping a stage. Now, all of this today is validated with observing through MRI scans. And this, what I'm saying, is just an MRI scan result. You see in the brain a stage skipped. It's as simple as that. Now, all of this, I'm coming back to the starting point, that the child must be consulted in his own growth. And the first reference you have is the child's interest. So we were taught, the first thing you do with children is observe them. Get to know them. And when you observe them, after a while, the child will reveal to you what is needed. And your intervention is perhaps minimal at that point, just to assist, to support, to direct, to provide whatever is needed and so on. But you understand why and how this whole thing works. But the principle itself now can be widened to something very rich and very wide. We move to the third principle of true teaching, and that is to grow from the near to the far. To grow from the near to the far. Very simply stated, but because it is stated in abstraction, you see it can be applied everywhere. Now, its most obvious application is you grow from the near, which is the senses, to the far, which is the abstraction of abstract ideas. And you see how the Montessori system makes this the basic timeline of development. But within the content of a day's activity, you can apply near to far. Start the day with things which are most accessible, most near to the child, and then grow to the more abstract. Within the realm of a child's interest, what is near to my heart, what is interesting for me, to that which is far, which is not so interesting for me, you can sequence in this way. So the principle itself can be applied in many different dimensions. If you're teaching history, well, start with your own history, your own environment, and then grow to the more abstract. Unlike the current system in India and most of the world, we'll start with ancient civilizations. We will read about Rome and Greece and Egypt. But you don't speak about the most ancient civilization still surviving, that is India. Why is that? Well, because the framework was still set by colonial past, etc., etc. But there's not even an attempt to review, and this is the sad part. So near to far, again, I don't go further into detail, but you see these three principles now. Nothing can be taught. The mind must be consulted in its own growth to grow from the near to the far. These three together, anytime you have a problem, I don't know what to do in this situation, turn to these three and you'll find the clue. Because they are together complete, very pithy sutras. But in the actual process of learning, in the daily interaction, in the framework, we were encouraged to create our own textbooks in the ashram school, tuned to the requirements of the children. We were encouraged to develop through project work, through activities, real life activities, and so on. So none of that is new for you, I'm skipping it. But the point was, you could tune in to the class's need of the day and adapt whatever you might have planned to their particular need. You channel the enthusiasm and interest of the class into a direction which is not opposing but guides it into a direction which perhaps you have as your objective, as your interest. And all of these skills are a necessary base with which we become effective in the classroom. It means we have to be extremely creative. We have to develop ourselves in multifaceted ways. And that's where we grow. It's not that we have already learnt everything, we come to children and now we teach them. We grow with them. And with each passing year, as children are different, we have to grow to adapt and to learn with them, for them, and learn to handle those situations. We have, for example, in our school a big problem the last 15 years, which is television. And it's a universal problem. We've never had to face that before, but now it's become such a huge disease. We were experimenting, and our teachers found ways around it. I can share one of the results which we found to be effective, that we get children to do some activity towards the end of the day in the classroom, some activity which is very interesting for the child. And when it's time, he does not want to stop, we say, all right, you can take it home. So he takes something home in continuity, which can replace now the television. Of course, a lot of this has to do with educating parents. And that becomes our biggest challenge. I would even say, especially when you are running schools in an environment which is so contrary, the first thing I will emphasize to every school is start talking to the parents. Get them to recognize the values, the principles, the things you're doing, why you're doing, how you're doing. Back it up with evidence from modern research, and there's so much research today to support. But you have to show them that. Take printouts, give it to them, show them. Tell them bluntly that forcing a child to learn the maths tables before the brain is ready will cause dyslexia. Say, do you want your child to be dyslexic? So in our school, we don't teach them writing until they start writing fully at the age of 6 or 7. Before that, yes, you have been using your hands to draw and to get your basic motor skills, but much of the work is oral, visual. And at that age, suddenly, within 6 months, they catch up with what other children have been struggling for 6 years. Because you've matched the timing when the brain, mind, and nervous system are ready. And you've prepared for it with things which they were ready for at those ages. So you have to explain this to the parents. And of course, we have the evidence. It's not like the Montessori system has started today. We have the evidence going back 100 years. Become conscious, dig out the research and place it before them. It makes a huge difference when people see printed paper saying, look, this is it. And if the research is a 30-page thing, wave it before them and then tell them the summary. They're not going to read it, but it helps to see a printout. Okay, so please make use of this and educate the parents. So when we have worked with schools which are trying to make a transition, the first thing we do, we work with the teachers and then we follow up with the parents. We have to have them on our side. And then we ask them to do a few things. We tell them, look, it's convenient for you to leave your child in front of the TV because it allows you to do what you want and you're not disturbed. But and now we discuss what happens. When you're watching TV, observe your child, you'll see the pupils are dilated. He doesn't blink. These are classic symptoms of mild hypnosis. Your child is under hypnosis while he's watching TV, and everything he's watching is going straight into the subconscious. That's how he learns all those swear words, that's how he becomes violent. Because everything on TV is violent, including your cartoons. Donald Duck is beating up somebody all the time. You just don't see blood. That's the only difference. And the guy is all shaken up and then he goes back and beats him up. And the whole culture is beat up each other. And that's what's going into your child's subconscious. And tomorrow, without being conscious of it, it pops up as his behavior. Do you really want that? They'll say, we don't have options. So now we should be ready. Here are the things you can do. And we should be able to provide them with things. So books, videos if you want, find in your own context, within your own culture, what's useful, what is helpful, and activities. And then if possible, we align what we do in school with what they do at home. And say, look, we're going to do this, you can supplement with this. Or we allow you to take these tools, or we allow you to make them at home, whatever form it takes, depending on the age group. But we have to take them on and make them also part of our work. You cannot separate home from the school. All teachers are parents and all parents have to be equally teachers. So it's a difficult process, unfortunately, because society is still in a contrary industrial mindset stage. In the modern research, we observe also what happens in the whole approach to current education, where we teach with snippets. Sri Aurobindo writes about this 100 years ago, and he says, it is the cause of the fickleness of the modern mind, teaching in snippets. Now typically you'll find children get restless after about 30 minutes. Adults get restless after 30 minutes. If you go to a public function, somebody is speaking, after about 30 minutes, suddenly the audience leans back and starts looking around. Do you know why? We've been programmed from childhood for the school bell that goes off after 30 minutes. And now with television, where you're being reprogrammed now for 20 minutes serials with ads in between which come every 5 minutes. So after 5 minutes, something is kicking in. Where's the ad? Where's the break? And some irritation comes in. But the school bell is a very deep programming. And we're taught to break concentration. The reality is this, if you really want to go deep in any learning, observe what the mind does. Look at what the children do when they're driven to do their exams preparation. They sit down, take one thing and hammer away at it for 2 hours. Until they're so fed up, they throw it away. And say, Mommy, I'm sick of this. Oh, go around, fool around. And of course, parents are disturbed. Oh, you should go and prepare, you should go and prepare. After a while, when they have recovered, they go back and again pound away at the same theme. And here you get a clue. What's happening inside the brain, inside the mind when we're learning something? We are not speaking of early children, but at late teenage. Okay? When the mind is sufficiently developed that you can guide it to do something of your choice. Notice what's happening. In the first phase, you are taking in. I'm going to here match it with MRI scan observations. Okay, so in the MRI scan, we can watch the brain while you're learning, and we find in the first phase, as you're learning, the information is going in and is stored in the temporary memory of the brain. And then you stop, you set aside the books, and you go and play in the garden. At that point, the brain is processing, and we watch how the brain is integrating all this and storing it in the permanent memory. That's when the real learning is taking place. That's when it's getting imprinted for good. When you're doing nothing and playing in the garden. Now the interesting thing was in the MRI scan observation, if at the end of the first session of absorption, you switched classes and went to the next learning, the new learning goes and replaces the learning in the temporary memory before it has a chance to go into permanent memory. And this is the pattern of current teaching. Class 1, physics. Class 2, geography. Class 3, language. Class 4, what are you doing? Each time the teacher comes and erases the blackboard, symbolically, we are erasing what was in the temporary memory. And so when child comes home, you ask the child, what did you learn today? Oh, the usual thing. Oh, tell me, I'm really interested. Okay, and he makes an effort and he can only recall the last class. Because all the stuff before that has been erased, he has to open books. And when he reviews it, it looks new. What a waste of time, what a waste of energy. After having made the class boring. So what a torture for the children. Now if we observe what's happening in the brain and now we tune our content and structure accordingly. You see the instinct. After the absorption, break, go and play. Allow for assimilation. And that's happening automatically. You don't have to do anything. In fact, you should not interfere with it. And so the recommended thing to do is do nothing. In Gujarat University, they did an experiment. They didn't know what they were doing. They just did an experiment. Between two classes, there's a 5 minute for transition between classrooms. They made the children sit down and chant Om. They found improved retention. Dramatically improved retention. What happened during the chanting of Om? Well, you did nothing. You made your mind blank. And that allowed for the assimilative process instead of erasing quickly. But note, there's something else that happens. When you have assimilated, something at the end of the assimilation, it kicks in and the instinct turns outwards. The child comes home and says, Mommy, you know what we did today? And he starts repeating. And if it was something he saw you do which was accessible, he wants to do it at home. I will show you. He wants to do it, execute it, express it. That completes the cycle. So there's first step, absorption. Second step, assimilation, and a third step of re-expression. Now you'll notice this happening on all levels of learning. Even with little children, there is a period of assimilation. They're doing something. When they're full, they stop and they stare out into space. They're doing nothing in particular. They're looking at others. Let them be. You don't have to keep them active. Activity has to be balanced with the opposite, inactivity and rest. When things are happening and you have to allow them to happen. And after a while, spontaneously he will reach out and want to do something. Either it will be taking the same things in a new way, or it will be shifting to a different activity. And now if we understand what's happening, then we can assist. And we have to tell this to parents. Now, you don't need to be told. All that I'm saying is already known to you. But I'm saying this because this is the stuff you can tell parents and explain to them in terms which are vocabulary of science, and that's acceptable to them. But when they understand, you will find parents very quickly come to assist you. I've had interactions at schools which are sometimes, you would call them the most elite, where the parents are the most extreme in their conventional thinking. And after a session of an hour or two, they come and say, you know what, we never thought about all these things. This is so new, this is so fascinating. What can we do? And they're ready for that. And you should be ready to tell them what they should do. And of course it will be done in many layers. Bit by bit, they can't change too quickly. But here's a vocabulary, here's a scientific research which will help them to understand. And I tell them this, when you watch your children preparing for an exam, when you watch them doing their studies, accept this, that this is a 3-step process. Many parents complain, my child has no concentration. He is totally distracted. I say, what do you mean? Well, you know, he's studying and then he stops his study and he's talking to his friends. After how much time? Well, he's been studying for 1 hour and then he's talking to his friends. So we have to go and explain to them, yes, that's a necessary phase. He needs to allow the assimilation process. And afterwards they understand it, they're not worried anymore. Okay, so I digressed a little bit, but I thought these will be useful tools in dealing with parents. But also you see how the same things you have known in a certain vocabulary, from a certain perspective, are being articulated now from a different vocabulary, from a different approach, from science or from other viewpoints. And it helps us to see things more richly. In the way we try to assist, especially as children grow older, we want to increase this power of concentration. So let me just step back for a moment. In all of current teaching, our focus is on subjects and information, right? But in the approach we take in integral education and in the Montessori approach, we have reversed the priorities. Remember, it's not the information which matters, it's what you do with the information, right? So we focus on the development of faculties of the mind. Information is secondary and incidental. So rather than teaching you physics or mathematics or history, I'm going to first think about what are the faculties that we want to tap, develop and stimulate. And then I can articulate them in terms of the vocabulary of this subject or the other. And with younger ages, I don't have a particular affiliation to a subject-based structure, because knowledge is one continuous domain. You can't cut it into pieces. The subject division is an artificial division, remnant of the industrial thinking, but useful when we enter more specialized domains of knowledge and experience. But for the younger ages, we want them to have this broad sense of continuity of world experience and knowledge experience. So at that point, I come into the class with a certain orientation. I watch the children, I sense what is the mood, what is the direction, and then I play with the content of the theme, the subject as necessary, but orient the faculties in the way that I want. So one of the things I do with little children is, the very early stage of the school, of the year, I ask each one of them, what's your special interest? What is it that fascinates you? I get to know their special areas. And then I may take that up. Or somebody says, I'm interested in animals, somebody is more into trees, someone is into planets and solar system. And I can use any subject as a window to develop the faculties and the kind of experience which I want to evoke in that class. And that's our skill as teachers. But you should know this, because knowledge is one continuity, you can make any subject as a window. I was very bored with biology because of the way they did it. But I was interested in computers. So a skilled teacher would say, all right, let's study the world's most powerful computer, that's your brain. And let's talk robotics, that's your body, right? And it's not difficult. You can bridge anything with anything. Take the child's most interesting subject, make it a window for his most boring or most difficult experience. As soon as we shift focus to faculties this becomes easy. But what are the fundamental faculties which allow for development of other faculties? And if we can focus on these early on, everything else becomes easy. Swami Vivekananda says something very interesting about this. He says, if I had to do my education all over again, I would not waste time with subjects. Instead, I would focus on developing my power of concentration and equality. And having mastered these, I could master any subject at will. Concentration, and he puts as second, equality. I'll touch upon the second one briefly, but we'll first concentration. It's obvious why. Because it's at the point when you concentrate that the breakthrough happens. But what is concentration itself? Psychologically, subjectively, what's happening in us when we concentrate? You notice we bring our whole consciousness into a narrow focus and a one-pointed focus. And when we have completed that one-pointedness, it's as if the whole world fades away. We are oblivious to everything else. And in that one-pointed focus, we are like a laser beam. We cut through the appearance and touch the essence, touch the soul of what we seek to know. And in that contact is the identification and the discovery, the illumination, the aha experience. Aha, I know it. I already knew it. I just discovered, uncovered, recovered it. So concentration is cutting through by the power of an exclusive focus that leads to an identification. And this capacity to narrow, to make a one-pointed focus, is a skill. And like all skills, it can be trained by practice. As adults, we are required sometimes to concentrate on things we don't like to concentrate on, which don't interest us. But as children, since they are not conscious enough to be able to make that effort, we just immerse them in things that interest them and leave them without interruption as long as possible in that immersion, and their capacity to concentrate grows by itself. So we watch them as they are immersed. When they stop, they look away. We watch. When they're ready for the next thing, we guide them to something else, or they find their own thing, and let them stay immersed, do not interfere. If they're daydreaming also, depending on age, allow them that state of complete immersion in the daydream. And these are all exercises by which they're developing something. Later, as they become more conscious and are able to direct their attention consciously, we will make them aware, look, you can do this. You need to hold your attention, and that's when you make your breakthrough. With little children, we may also do simple exercises. And one of the things which we used to do as children in kindergarten, in the third year of kindergarten, was you sit with a little flame, and we say we will sit very silent and watch the base of the flame, and just remain watching without looking at anything else, without thinking of anything else, and just watch that. And we do it, it's fascinating, it's interesting, and that's it. But at the age of 10, 11, when they are becoming more conscious, especially of their own thoughts and the way they think, we can talk to them and say, you know what, you can make your mind silent, you can remove these distracting thoughts and focus on what you want, try it, it'll be interesting. And the child will actually try it. And when he does it, it's such a joyous experience. Wow, I can actually change how I think. And they start experimenting very quickly. And so you will watch, and sometimes now children, often many children are early in their awareness. If you catch such children, you can even speak to them at an early age. So just watch them and make them conscious. But later on, as they become older, we're going to tell them this. Here are exercises you can do to develop your power of concentration. And like muscles, it's something which develops by use. You don't do it, it will tend to weaken with time. The same with willpower, which Sri Aurobindo puts as the other complementing principle, concentration and willpower. With these two together, you can do anything in life. And so we will consciously develop these two faculties. Swami Vivekananda speaks of equality, and I'm going to touch upon this briefly. When you seek knowledge, and especially when you seek knowledge which is not informational, but intuitive, You want an insight. You want to know something deep from within the soul of things. The concentration cuts through. But a state of receptivity where your mind is silent and without preconception, without agitation, without bias, allows for the knowledge to reflect without distortion. Does that make sense? Your state of receptivity, which is without bias and without agitation, is like a screen on which the thing you are seeking to know can reflect spontaneously, like the sun reflects on the still waters. If the waters are agitated, the light is all broken up. You do not see the sun. And our mind is like that, and the knowledge is above, and the knowledge reflects in the still mind, and you see it all. Not just see, you experience, you live it. That's when it is an intuitive knowing. All knowledge is essentially intuitively felt in some deep part within us, and then a part of that reflects in the surface as a thought out knowledge. Notice when you have the aha experience, I know it, and then you rush to articulate, wait, let me think, let me find the words. A part of you knows what you want to say, but you don't have yet the words. You have not yet put it into form of thoughts. And there's a process now of translating an experience into thoughts and then into words. But you can train yourself to know and to be in that thoughtless awareness, which is an intuitive knowledge experience. Little children tend to have that much more easily, spontaneously. When they learn to think more, the activity of thought tends to blur and cover up this intuitive knowing. That's when we say, now they don't feel so easily with the heart. Because the intuitive knowing is felt much more than thought out. You know things you don't know how to articulate as children, right? So we want to develop also this equality aspect. And I just touch upon this briefly, move back to faculties. Concentration, willpower as your two primary faculties. And willpower with little children is done in the same way. Here is a thing which is difficult, I persist and I overcome, and the joy of overcoming. That becomes my motivation. With older children, you will tell them this. You see what a joy it is when you overcome. And then you will give them tools and means to develop. So with older children, I will tell them this. I say, take up one simple activity. So simple that you have no excuse to not do it. Every morning after you've had your breakfast, you take your plate or your cup and you will yourself wash it. How long does it take? 15 seconds? If you do it well, 20 seconds? So there's no excuse. Even if you're late for school, you can do your 15 seconds. But you do it and force yourself to do it. And the day you forget, the moment you remember, you'll pick up that cup and wash it. So I forgot, I remembered later, and although the cup is already washed, I'm going to pick it up and do it again. And you persist in doing something very simple. So the technique is like you build your muscles. You don't lift 100 kilos, you'll tear your muscles. You take a 1 kilo weight and pump 100 times. So you take this little cup and do it every day for the next 2 months. And if you've done it for 2 months, you will notice already by the 3rd month, everything you want to do elsewhere in life automatically becomes easier. Your willpower has grown stronger. And the same with concentration. I give them an exercise. It may be very boring, but now they're old enough to do something they don't like to do. And it may be something simple like you take a big print newspaper headline, and with your eyes you follow the outline of the text of each letter, one by one. Slowly, watching the texture of the paper, the smudge of the ink, and just follow mechanically. Now this is a pure concentration exercise. Your interest doesn't count, doesn't matter. But I tell them with a book, the day you can do 1 full line of a children's book like this, your power of concentration will be strong enough that you'll see its effects in everything else that you do. And the day you can do 1 page, you'll have the capacity to do whatever you want to do. And I've had children coming with dyslexia, with complete ADHD, or whatever names you give to these things which are being treated with medicines. Have them go through this exercise within a month or 2, They've changed completely. In one case, a child who had absolutely no capacity for mathematics, no concentration, in a casual conversation, his hands were swinging like he was doing cricket and completely disoriented. After a year of persistent exercise, and he did it on his own, we just showed him once and he pursued. He wanted to get over his problem. After a year, he was teaching maths to his classmates. And that was the extent. And then he joined the IIT and went into some which was impossible in the way he was just before. And one simple exercise changed his whole life. So make them conscious. Here, this key is concentration. Everything else, all other faculties will grow on their own if you pursue with concentration. So I leave these with you as a backdrop. Well, I grew up in this school, and I'm a product of that. I had the freedom to do pretty much everything I wanted to do, and so I was ahead of my class in most subjects that interested me. I skipped some subjects which didn't interest me, but the broad base of faculties allowed me to take them up later in adulthood and learn whatever I needed to do and so on. But a broad flexibility of personality which allowed things to grow freely. And this school has a strong connection with Maria Montessori. And I wanted to end with this. You know, when she came to India, and she was for 6 years in Madras, pretty much under house arrest because of Second World War and the political situation with the British fighting Italy. Then she was allowed to go for lectures and so on. So she traveled to a few places in India. But it was here that she had some of her most extraordinary insights, as you know from her books. She watched a child and a mother and an interaction and the bond, and then she developed from it a whole new dimension to education. And so I always like to remind people that you have to understand her not so much as an educator first, but as a mystic first. She was a mystic first and foremost, applying her insight into the cosmos and to humanity and human nature in the domain of education. And that's how you understand this power. She observes a single incident, and out of that draws out this whole thing. And another little incident, which to us would have been just another day. But from that, an insight, a revelation, and then a power to articulate that revelation in a way that inspires others. To build it in a framework which you understand, which is rational, philosophical, even metaphysical. And you read it and you say, wow, yes, this makes sense. It resonates with my heart. That's the power. But the insight itself is a mystic insight. And she had to modulate her language to match the circumstances of the society of the age, of the period. And so you will see often that there's something being said, but what is meant is much more deep. But the words stop short because, well, that's all that you can say without getting into trouble. As you know, she did get in trouble with the Italian government at some point and all that. But so you have to see all her writings, read all her writings in this sense, and then you will find so much more that comes. So during the time she was there, one of the books that came out was The Secret of Childhood. And so in the 1943 December, she wrote and inscribed one of the books to Sri Aurobindo. She wrote on the book, "To Sri Aurobindo, with devotion and gratitude, Maria Montessori, December 1943. So I have this photocopy of this imprint page where she wrote this, and just from Madras to Pondicherry. But the interesting part was this year in February, I had to speak at the program in Bombay, the National Conference of the Montessori in India. And 2 weeks before that, somebody came to my house for no reason at all. She is the mother of a classmate of mine. We grew up together since kindergarten. And this mother came and met me. I still don't remember why she came. I met her after a year. And incidentally, I mentioned, I don't know why, that I was going just within 2 weeks to Bombay for this meeting. And she said, "Oh yes, my husband was Maria Montessori's secretary. Bableshwar, his name was Bableshwar. He was with her for many years from Karnataka. And he was with her for many years. He knew of Sri Aurobindo then, and he was corresponding from there to Sri Aurobindo. Finally, he settled in the ashram and his son was my classmate. There's this very interesting chain of coincidences. So there was a very close connection because they were all belonged to the elite of India at that time, and there was a very close correspondence between them. And as it turns out, I was told, I don't have, unfortunately, something more concrete. I was told that she visited the ashram, but I couldn't find something more concrete. But I have a letter from her, which was addressed to the students of the ashram school. I mentioned to you that the school was started in 1943, when the children came from as refugees of the Second World War. And the mother said, well, so far the ashram was a very closed community, entirely focused on a spiritual development. And she said, here's an opportunity to build the new humanity without the pre-programming that we have to unlearn. And Sri Aurobindo had already set this framework of education. So she used that opportunity to start the school. And at that point, Dr. Maria Montessori was in Chennai. She sent this letter, which was read out on the opening day of the school. And I want to read it out to you. This is on the AMI letterhead of that time. To the children of the ashram school, Pondicherry. Yours is the world of the spirit. In the midst of all that is high, grow in the new world of freedom that is being constructed for you. Grow and give the possibility to all the divine powers that God has put into you to expand and to uplift. This will be your way of offering yourselves to God and to His will. You will, when grown, be the ones that will keep the world bright, beautiful, and happy. Maria Montessori. It's so beautiful. I have 3 copies here which I'd like to leave with you, and perhaps you can share with others.
Oh, thank you very much.
And I think it is worth it even to put it up in your school if you like.
Yes.
Yes. But you can see here the whole spiritual and mystic dimension of her, and she saw education in this sense. It was not for her just a social, not just a pedagogic, educational thing. There was a beautiful quotation right at the beginning, the first one which was put here, that it is a social, and I saw the word and I said she had to do that because that's the only way it could be acceptable to people who wouldn't understand the word spiritual. It is a spiritual cause, not a social cause. It's a spiritual cause, and you can see in her writing, she saw it that way. And when she speaks of this cosmic purpose, it's because she sees the cosmos as one. And for us, it's not something merely for the pedagogy that, oh yeah, you have to connect the child to everything in nature. We have to learn to see, as she saw, the unity of the whole world and the whole cosmos. And see the world itself, as we say in the Vedic context, the world is a manifestation of the divine, the oneness becoming multiple. God is not sitting up there dictating terms and ordering us and punishing or rewarding. God is manifest in world and as world. Everything around us is divine. And it is that divinity which is concealed in form, which is struggling to emerge, and its emergence is what we call evolution. And the plant is nothing but that divine presence in things reaching out, emerging from the rock where it is asleep and expressing the capacity of feelings, and in the animals expressing emotions, and the human thinking. We are the divine presence waking up, discovering itself, and becoming co-creators in the divine manifestation. That's the vision of the Veda. That's the vision we have even in the Montessori framework, in integral education. And we have to consciously tune ourselves in to begin to see the world in this way, and then to look upon the children in this way, and in our whole interaction with them in this way. And I believe that if we can just do this much, the whole framework of the system grows out of it effortlessly. You don't have to learn and think. You have only to resonate with this deep vision, and you feel, oh yes, this is true, this is right, and I know it. I already knew it. You just made me conscious of what I knew, and I do it. One of the most moving experiences I had was when we interviewed the head of the kindergarten in the ashram school, somebody named Kala Ben. She is now 78 or 80. She was 12 years old when the mother gave her the assignment of being the head of the kindergarten, a school which was just starting. She was 12 years old, and she goes to the mother and says, "Mother, I don't know anything about teaching, what should I do?" And so she shared with us this guideline. And somebody asked, this was a meeting we had with a group of teachers from Bombay. So they asked her, "What is the single most important thing we should do with children?" And she thought for a while, 80 years of experience, okay, 70 years of experience. And then she said, "Love. Love the children. Everything else will follow." And this was the advice that the mother gave her. She said, "You be there and just love the children. And the rest follows." Because love is that movement in us, which is the original movement of the divine consciousness embracing the universe and drawing it back to itself. It is that divine power of embracement that draws back to unity, which brings together the universe, which awakens life, which awakens mind, which brings us together as friends, which makes the atoms connect to each other and bind to each other to form molecules, which brings and holds nature together. It's the single most powerful force in the universe. And when we love, we share in the love of the divine for the whole cosmos. We become means of its expression. When we love children, we evoke from them that same love. Or rather, they teach us how to love them. When we watch them for a while, our hearts just open and we say, "Oh." And they teach us, they help us grow. And it is in that bond that everything emerges spontaneously, truly. And all knowledge, all right action spontaneously happens. You don't feel you're doing something, it just happens. And so this is the single most important thing we learned that we should all be doing or allowing. So I will pause here. I've taken more time than I should have, but I was told we're a little flexible. So I'll invite your questions if we have time. And yes.
So let's do Zoe and then John, or John and then Zoe, it doesn't matter. Whichever round.
Sir, you said children choose their environment and from birth they get into it, right? So in that same context, I would believe that the children choose their parents and their teachers even before they are taken their birth.
Yes.
If that's so, that's the karmic forces that's at work. So isn't it the responsibility of the parent and the teacher to provide the environment that the child demands and is seeking to explore and grow in its developmental process? And probably we have this problem that the parents and the teachers end up developing attachment to the child and their own ideologies or whatever, and then they are not able to give that love that you rightly said.
Yes.
So
I would agree with what you say in principle, but I will put certain caveats. You know, when we say a child chooses the environment, chooses parents, it's not done in the way we think, because the soul is not so much at that point in the domain of form, but it feels. It feels an environment conducive, resonating with its aspiration. It feels supported and nourished by that, and it is attracted to that. When the soul is more conscious, it can choose and be drawn into that. And then when it comes into the world of form, it is a very different story. Everything is a compromise. I felt a nourishment from this source, but I also have conflicts and contradictions from other issues. But that's fine. But a soul which is not so mature, not so developed, may not even be conscious, but it's naturally drawn by resonance to what is natural to its emergence. So you cannot always say everything was exactly as it should have been, because you don't always have a choice there. Teachers always are not exactly as they should be. Parents, if they are conscious, can feel what a child needs and assist in an environment conducive. I'll give an example here. Just a few days ago, I had a conversation with parents whose child insisted on going abroad to study in England. And they were worried because they are a conservative family. We don't know what will happen in a space like that. The child is 18 years old. So I had a chat with the child and I discovered what the issue was. She was naturally a free spirit. And she was suffocating in this environment of structured and mechanical learning which she had. And she couldn't get her entry into university in India, which was more flexible. And this was the only space she would get it. And my conclusion was this. I said, she needs that space. And if you have other problems associated with it, you'll have to find a way to deal with those problems. So parents have to be conscious, but most of them are not so conscious. And I would be fortunate if I have parents who can feel. Children say things sometimes because they feel, but they don't know how to articulate. But occasionally they're also distracted by something because they're following peer pressure. And we need to be able to distinguish between the two and go to the heart of things. That's why we as teachers have a responsibility even to counsel parents in this way with a deeper insight. But we have to find ways to articulate, to find that thing which you can't express and then give a form to it that also becomes subjective enough that they can understand, oh yeah, that makes sense.
So in this whole exercise, you would advise that parents can be trained to understand the children?
Some can, some are too hardened. There's a whole process of awakening. You're fortunate, like I said, you're fortunate if you have parents who are awake. But generally, you have an advantage already. In a Montessori school, parents don't come to you unless they're already half awake. So you can go a long way with them. But it may take time. But they also have all these fears. What will my child do without that paper, the exam and the results? So you have to explain to them and show them ways. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for everything that you said and shared. It really informs my practice. And I have so many questions, but I guess I'll narrow them down to two. The first is, would you mind explaining a bit more how absorption and identification are related and how that informs the absorption and identification. And then my second question is a little more light. I'm wondering if there are any training opportunities under you and your team.
Okay. In the experience when we concentrate on something or someone, when you're listening to a music performance, a music recital, it's very different when it's live. And the reason is this: you can identify more easily. A part of you is connecting, feeling what the musician feels. And when he goes, the whole music goes like that, you feel your whole being rising. And that's how he's transmitting an experience to you. And the same thing happens when a teacher is communicating something. And when it's not just fact-based, but insight involving some new experience. A part of you leans in and connects and identifies. And because you're identified, you're imprinting. But this identification is possible because something in you is already one with that. And the imprinting is only awakening and drawing forward and making explicit what was held within you implicitly. I do this exercise with teachers when I'm speaking to them, especially teachers who for science subjects. And I point out to them that you need to first get an experience, a living experience, and then give a vocabulary to it. And I show them how you can do that. If you like, we'll do that as an experiment here, just to show you what I mean with this. We're going to do a physics lesson. And it's going to be about, let's do this experiment. It's a thought experiment first. You have a little slope here, and we've got two balls of the same size. One is made of this heavy iron, and another is made of this very light balsa wood, same size. And I release them both together, and they roll down, and they reach the end. Which one will reach sooner?
Both will reach at the same time.
Both will reach at the same time. There are only 3 answers possible. So anyone else has the other answers?
The heavy one will get there first.
One will get there first. Which one?
The heavy one.
The heavy one. Someone else? Anyone says the light one? That's the only third option. Okay, nobody. Let's see now. We're going to do an experiment. So what you said was, because you've learned 2 things falling together will fall at the same time. Heavy one, because the first thing is heavy things, the first sense of instinct is heavy things should fall faster, because we see leaves and feathers drifting slowly because of the air resistance. They drift slowly, whereas heavy things, they don't have the same resistance. Okay. But now we're going to do an experience of identifying. You have to become one with the ball and feel the ball as it rolls. Okay? So now you first become the heavy ball. You're a piece of iron, and now you start rolling, and you roll and roll and roll and roll and roll and roll and crash. Okay? Now you become the light ball. Let go of the heaviness. You're this light balsa wood. You're released, and pop, you bounced. Okay? Now tell me, in your experience, which will reach first? Interesting. Everybody is saying the one thing no one wanted to say. The light one. Why? And now describe to me why from your experience. What do you feel? The heavy one, when it starts rolling, it's like, I have to overcome my turning resistance, weight to turn. Whereas the light one, okay, I don't have the same resistance, right? The difference here is not the falling, they're turning. And the turning requires, I need to overcome my weight. You see? Now in physics, we give a name to this. Resistance to turning. I write on the blackboard, resistance to turning. You feel it, right? So a resistance we call inertia, and turning we call moment. Moment of inertia is the technical term, which means nothing but resistance to turning, right? What's it dependent on? And I want you to feel, it depends on what? On the mass, yes, of course. The heavier, if it was iron, it was heavy. If it was balsa wood, it's light. The overall weight, the mass. And what else? On the size. If it's a small metal ball, it will turn quickly. If it's a large metal ball, there's so much more distance it needs to turn, so much more weight it has to move. So resistance to turning is proportional to the mass and the size. I write this on the blackboard in English words. And then I say, you know what, it's a big complication to say this in so many words. I'm going to say it in code word. Resistance to turning, and I put a letter P, is equal to mass m multiplied by r, radius. P equals m multiplied by r. It's just a quick way of saying the same thing. Okay? Moment of inertia is mass into radius. So we just did a physics lesson where we came to a formula which basically you discovered from your own experience, which we reduced from English words to code words, which is easy to write, takes less ink also, quicker to write, which you can quickly remember as a mnemonic. But now you have a mnemonic for an experience which is already with you. Unlike an exam where you would have forgotten a formula that you learned after finishing the exam, this experience will stay with you even after 10 years. After 10 years, if somebody asks you, oh, by the way, do you remember that experiment we did with the ball rolling? Oh, yes. Can you tell me the formula for this resistance to turning? Yes, you can derive it now because it's part of your experience. You get it? You learned nothing by heart. The experience is a part of you already. Where was it? It's not something which you took from outside you. It's something which emerged from within you when you identified with that. You get my point? All learning should emerge from an experience and should involve this aha. I know it already. It was already within me. I just discovered it. And it's always permanent after that. Anything which you've slapped on like paint will get washed out. Something I learned by heart will be forgotten. Something that emerged from a living experience is mine forever. I may forget those code words you used, but I'll create my own code words, but I'll recover the formula, which is nothing but an expression of my living experience. You see? When you did this experiment of identifying with the ball, a key element was your power of concentration. To be able to identify, become the ball, and not to be everything else. You see?
As far as training?
Yes, for training. We have in the ashram school itself, we do not have a formal training framework, but there's an associated institution called Mri Aurobindo Society, which holds, I think, 2 education training camps every year. You could write to them, I'll give you a number you can contact. But separately in Delhi, there is a school called Mirambika School. They have ongoing training programs through the whole year. They have specialized in what they call the free progress method, where everything from beginning to end is in a framework of complete freedom, where the children can do all their activities and the teachers are only assisting. There are no formal structures at all. And they have ongoing training programs from a few days to a few months. So I can give you the numbers there. But these are the only 2 places that I know.
I'd like to share an assimilation that I had. I've been fortunate enough to attend the Bombay lecture that he gave. So what got me thinking was the similarities with, a lot of similarities that our Montessori work shares with Aurobindo's principles. So one thing which he spoke about was from near to the far, where he gave a sense of the pedagogy that we follow, where we start with the concrete and move to the abstract. But what really struck me was the core principles that Dr. Montessori has worked upon are also applying in the same way. When we look at the planes of development, 0 to 6 we work with an immediate environment, 6 to 12 we work with the culture, 12 to 18 where the children try to find their place in the environment, and 18 to 24 they become a part of the society and in turn the universe. So it's again a near to far which is embedded in the principle itself and not just the pedagogy that we follow, which is a very interesting revelation.
Yes.
I would just add up to that. We have in our culture, we call it as Swadharma. And Dr. Montessori speaks about the core, that we adults can be at the periphery, but we cannot touch the core of the child. And the child has to take it from the periphery to the core. So can you just do the Swadharma and how the core is?
Okay.
And my second question is about the concentration which you mentioned. What do you think about the total awareness? I mean, concentration is just a 5 or 10 minute exercise, whereas J. Krishnamurti talks about being aware, even if you're concentrating, also being aware of the sound and everything, and remaining in that state of awareness.
Yes.
So just 2 questions.
Okay. Yeah, very important questions. The first one is about the taking in. When I'm going to relate it also to a broader issue of discipline. When we observe children, you will find innately they are trying to actualize themselves in whatever they do. But the level from which they are aware of the actualization process is somewhat on the surface. Especially because in the modern society, we teach them always to turn outwards. If we see a child sitting idle, daydreaming, stop daydreaming, do this. We get the senses outwards. But we rarely allow them to turn the senses inwards. And if we can recognize the value of that, we will encourage it also as parents and as teachers. When they turn their senses inwards, again, at first they're exploring. Even when they're daydreaming, they're creating, they're exploring, which is something which is on the surface. But it may be necessary once in a while to make them conscious that there's something deeper, there's something behind. And the moment you point it out, they feel it. They become conscious. And of course, there are further depths to it. But it's useful if we can make them conscious of that and then relate that to what they do. So in issues of discipline, rather than scolding and saying, don't do this, I threaten you, or I reward you, or don't do this because it's not acceptable, or it's bad or good, which is your arbitrary definition of what's good and bad. For him, it might not have been bad at all. We give him that reference of that innate thing where he knows. So I shared with you an incident which took place at Mirambika school with one of the teachers, because they're trained not to interfere. She watched two children fighting, and she sat and watched them. One of the children came to her, sat down next to her, and then she asked him, "What happened?" So he says, "I fought with my best friend." Then she waits. So she has to be centered. It's very important because there's a resonance happening. So you have to be in the right state. And then she says, "What do you feel?" And he turns attention inwards. So far he's thinking. He's about that. Now he turns inwards. And then he says, "Idhar darad hota hai. It is paining here." Then she says quietly, "What do you want to do?" So again he introspects. "I want to be friends with him." She says, "What's stopping you?" And suddenly it strikes him. He gets up, goes, they make friends, they start playing, and they start fighting again. But what she did was lead him to introspection. Just with those questions. Now if I was agitated and asked those same questions, it would have no effect. I need to be centered equally at that point. And because of that resonance, he gets pulled in also. But that turning in to find yourself and your answer there, that's the gift. And we need to do that in all issues of discipline. You just did something which spilled water, created noise, disturbed someone, etc. Okay, you intervene and say, "Look," again depending on age, but you say, "Look, I respect you. You're such a good boy. What you did there, it hurt so many people. Is that what you want to do? What do you want to do? Do what you want. I leave you free to do. But you should do what you truly feel like." Now, depending on age, you'll word it differently. You make them conscious of what they really want, not what they wanted in an impulse. And so, as they grow older, it's possible to touch that. At younger ages, you may not use that vocabulary, but you'll create experiences. So what I do with parents sometimes, they say, "What do we do to inculcate these deeper values?" Some of them are living in societies which are contrary. In India, it's already different, but in the US, they're living in societies where things are so different. I tell those parents, you sit every morning when you do your prayers or your meditation, let your baby sit with you. Let the baby get familiar with those vibes. And as the child grows older, have them participate and share with you. And maybe they can't sit for 10 minutes with eyes closed and concentration, but you just have them sit and tell them, "Look, we're going to sit here and feel quietly happy deep in our heart." Words, the vocabulary is not so important. I will not use the word soul, or if already it's part of my family vocabulary, I can use that. The child will make out what it means. But these ideas need to be touched upon, but the experience has to be given as a living experience. And the resonance and the sensitivity felt deep inside. I remember when I was a kid, my mother said, I was in kindergarten, my mother said, "I have to go now for meditation." So I said, "What is this meditation?" So she said, "We go inside." So for the next 2 weeks, I was thinking about it. And then finally, when I went with my mother to that place, and I came out relieved, and I said, "Oh, that means you don't have to take your hands and legs inside you." But there's a thought process. You're doing an introspection. I see what they're doing. And then if someone explains to me, we feel deep in our heart, where there's that place where you feel happy, where you're just happy and silent, and we stay there for a while. These are words a child will understand. I had a girl in my class, she was 10. She said, "I was sick the last week, I was in high fever, and I prayed and prayed, but I didn't get well." Okay, so now it's a very difficult situation. I said to her, "When you prayed, it was from here." She was agitated. I said, "There's a place behind that. Behind your emotions, there's a place where you're very quiet. It's from there that you have to pray." And she turns in, 10 seconds later, there's a glow on her face. "Oh, it's so beautiful." She felt it. You have to find your way, your vocabulary, your occasion. You can't do it all the time, but when you get an opportunity, point them in that direction, let them be conscious. And if you have an environment conducive, it becomes easier. I will say this here with these words. Your school space should be a spiritual space. It doesn't mean religious. You may have no religious symbol, but the atmosphere has to be of the spirit. And that starts with us. The suggestion I would give you, if you are the head of this space, the responsibility is yours first. And so you must spend time in the morning before you go there, or if you go there when you're alone, before things start. You will sit alone quietly, enter deep within you. Again, I'll use a vocabulary. The space where you feel your deepest and highest and truest aspiration. Whatever that means for you. Just go deep within, as deep as you can. Be in that space behind your emotions, where there's a joy, there's a peace, there's a light, there's a beauty, there's a love, which is causeless. Remain immersed in that. And then from within there, turn to look at the world. You don't just rush out. You stay there and turn to look at the world. Look at the whole universe, and then look at your school, and then look at your children. And know them also as souls in evolution, and that space as the sacred space. And then you begin your day. And that's you, because you're head of the group, you hold the responsibility. Subsequently, when your teachers come, before the children come, if you can have the teachers sit with you, and we sit in a circle. And I will use with them the similar vocabulary. Become conscious deep within you of your aspiration. Let's sit together in a quiet aspiration so that we are prepared for the day. And we sit maybe short time, depending on if your teachers are completely in alignment, you may sit longer, or even 30 seconds or 1 minute to center. When the students come, we already have a space that we are holding, and they slip into that space. You will find them shift the moment they enter that space. If necessary, you may use soft, soothing, uplifting music, not exciting, not stimulating, but uplifting music. And when they enter that space, they easily move into that vibration. And you'll find the reference is they don't want to leave the school. The parents come to take them and they don't want to go. Then you know that you have done it. But the parents will feel the difference. When they come, they say, we feel a great peace and a great joy, we're happy here. They don't have words to express, but you create an ambience. After a while that sustains. Afterwards, as we come in as teachers, it's ready, it carries us. So you have to consciously create that. It takes a while, but once you have it, it will carry you easily. So, coming to your second question about awareness of all, that also is a form of concentration. You see, normally by concentration we understand a narrowing of focus to something exclusive in which everything else is set aside. Yes, it is still a narrowing of focus on the whole. Only we don't call it narrowing because these are just words we use. We put an exclusive focus on the sense of the all, on the sense of the totality, and we are aware. And through the senses turned outward, we are utterly and intensely aware. That also is an exercise, it's also a form of meditation, but it is with senses turned outwards. You could do the same with the senses turned inwards. Or transcending the senses with just awareness of the inner and the outer world. The inner universe and the outer universe as one coterminous totality, one reality. Transcendent, immanent, and universal, all together. So these are all variations, but they all involve holding attention in a kind of an exclusive focus. And some of them will involve an interiorized state, some more exteriorized, and some total. But in that state, you'll find you can be functioning in doing everything in life. And sometimes what happens is there's a double awareness. A part of your awareness is always on the whole, and then a special focus turns to the issue at hand. And both are there. At any point, one leans on the other supports on this.
Can you go back to your music concert analogy? Mm-hmm. I understood when you said you came out a different person or you came out the same person. Mm-hmm. What I didn't understand was the why.
Yes. In the example of the classroom, it is more obvious. In a lecture, you learned something new because your mind was engaged, and in your mind you have a sense that you have learned something. But the real truth of the learning was not in what you understood, but what you experienced behind the understanding, which gives value to what you understood. Like I said, I could explain to you moment of inertia as a formula and you will understand the formula. But the experience of moment of inertia is the thing which gives the formula value. So a lot of the school interaction that takes place, a lot of the online learning is really superficial learned content where you have grown, but your grown does not have real depth and can easily fade. In the music concert though, there is no engagement of the intellect, obviously. And the whole thing is taking place on that inner level. And at that point, if you observe, you have to let go of the mind. Your heart engages, connects, feels. And as the music flows, something in your heart is flowing with it. There's an identification with the music. And the musician lifts you and carries you in a journey. And as the music splits, something in your consciousness splits, changes, moves, he's leading you into an experience. So now everything depends on what's the quality and level of experience that the musician evokes. Now there are musicians who evoke excitement, or even those who evoke chaos. Metal has a lot of chaotic energy. It breaks you up. It's also an experience. It's interesting for a few seconds, but after a while it becomes painful perhaps to a sensitive person. But to a hardened and dulled teenager who has been listening to it and his sensitivity is so dulled, that's the only thing which is stimulating. And so you need to undo the dulling if you want him to be able to appreciate anything finer. But what's happening is the music is carrying you in the quality and level of consciousness that the musician has and is evoking. In the Indian tradition, the goal of music and the whole training was to put you in relation with the divine. We had an interview once with one of the famous musicians in India. We asked him, what do you feel? Where is your attention? Are you watching the audience? Are you thinking of this? What do you experience? And he says, within me is God, around me is God, everywhere it's only God. That's the epitome of the whole training program for music. And even if you come close to that, and if you're aspiring to experience something which is transcending, something which touches something of that divine joy or love, that is what resonates and fills the music and leads the audience into that experience. So music has a very powerful transforming potential. Now all that depends is on the musician himself. In any case, the change is taking place at a level which is not the surface mind. And that's why it can sometimes be profoundly changing, but you don't know how to express it. And then you come out with the words that say, oh, it was so moving, it was so extraordinary, so wonderful. And I say, what was so great about this musician? Oh, you don't know, you have to experience it, I can't explain to you. Yes. Does that satisfy you?
My question was, how do we discover ourselves? And another question I have is, I see there are a lot of behavior issues increasing in the classrooms, like children with ADHD and dyslexia and so many other issues. And I have seen that a lot of teachers are not able to handle these issues, and some schools are closing down. Some children are asked to, they are suspended from the school because parents complain it's not fair for their children when they mix with this. So yes. I don't know, where is the place for these kind of children, and yes. How do we tackle these issues?
Yes, so your second question first about ADHD. In the US they're even giving medication and they treat your ADHD. If your attention is wandering, it's not a medical condition. It's an issue with the mind. But having said that, the causes of these things increasing are many. A large part has to do with society and activities that children are exposed to, especially television. But some part of it has to do with the food and has a biological basis. There is evidence to show, research which you should pull out the printout and show your parents, that food colorings and food additives cause restlessness in the nerves and increase symptoms of ADHD. There are known toxins, nervous toxins, which they are put in the food only for the coloring. Now imagine if you told parents, I'm going to put a poison in your food, in your child's food, just to make it look nice and make it attractive. Would you like that? Of course we would say no. But that's what the companies are doing. And we need to say it. Get rid of the neurotoxins from the food. Do not give processed foods. Tell the children that these foods have colorings which are harmful. Show them the research. And tell them to avoid these things. Home cooked food is best. Do not buy from outside. And if you see bright colors, avoid those foods. It does make the nerves restless. So, and then there are other things which are coming in the food. There are also hormones which are being pumped into the water supply. Hormones human beings use which go into the water, which are changing the gender of the fish. I don't know if you've read about this in the lakes in the US. So it's a big mess. The plastic we use has a particular molecular structure in the BPA, which is very similar to certain hormones. And that leaches in the water when the plastic is exposed to the sun. And you'll see all these bottles are taken in trucks which are completely open to the sun. It's full of the hormone. You drink it, it's affecting things. So a lot of junk is going into us which is really breaking up the human biology. That being one cause. The rest is psychological. When you watch TV, where every 3 seconds the image changes. And that is becoming shorter. In the time of Alfred Hitchcock, if you see those movies 30, 40 years ago, one scene would last 30 seconds sometimes. Then each passing decade it has gone to half. Today's scenes typically have 2 to 3 seconds and then they switch. The brain quickly gets habituated to high stimulus, rapid changing images. And now you're asking me to sit and look at this boring teacher who's talking some boring stuff and sit idle. Come on, my body is going to get restless. Right? In some schools, often they have children, they're coming in a state of excitement. Parents, come, rush quickly, you're late. And now you're thrown into the school. They're coming in a state of restlessness. You have to bring them into stillness. Some schools find it useful to have them play till they're exhausted and then come into the classroom. I personally don't think that's good. Because then they're exhausted and you can't do anything useful with the mind. Okay, you put them to sleep and then wake up, there's a different story. But I would rather catch them when the mind is fresh, but help the body to become quiet. And so here, the solution, teach them to become quiet at a physical level. You can't tell them stop your thoughts. You can tell them to stop moving and to relax the body. It's not enough to stop moving when my body is tense. I need to relax. And I never learned to relax as a kid because I was always driven. And so one of the best means to teach relaxation is stretching, asanas. What passes as yoga today. Asanas is the correct term, stretching exercises. Do them and give them an activity which the mind is engaged in while doing asanas. That means you say, feel your muscles. Can you feel your tendons? You give names, so you're using a vocabulary at the same time. As you pull your toes, can you feel the muscle there? That is a tendon. This part is, can you feel the bones? So your mind is active while the body is being stretched and relaxed. And the mind itself, and then you hold. And the mind is brought into calm. A few basic breathing exercises of pranayama, but basic ones which involve nadi shuddhi, the alternate nostril breathing, will also help to calm and purify. Now you notice the breath is deeply connected to the emotions and the thoughts. When you're angry, you're upset, how dare you? I'm breathing shallow and rapid, and it makes my head go giddy. Try this as an experiment, just breathe shallow and rapid, you'll find you get giddy. When you want to control yourself, take a deep breath, relax, and half my anger is gone. Okay, so conscious deep breathing automatically makes the emotions and thoughts quiet, whereas rapid shallow breathing makes them agitated. So basic deep breathing exercises will again help to calm. So one thing we can do, they come into the classroom We sit quietly with music and say, let's take a slow, deep breath and relax. And another slow, deep breath, and you pace it. And you'll find immediately the body relaxes. But for the extreme cases, practice of asanas will be a great help with breathing. And then, help them develop their power of attention. Which means give them an activity that they really enjoy and then let them remain immersed as long as they like. You are undoing what the parents have done. But now you cannot have them continue to do the damage on the other side while you undo here. So you will have to engage with the parents and reduce the exposure to TV. And you have, of course you have to tell them what to give the children instead. With older children, I encourage reading. So I have children sometimes at the age of 11, 12, 13. They have a lot of distractions. They are not able to hold attention. The best practice is read a book. Not comics. Because in comics, the pictures are already made for you. Your creative power is not engaged. A story book, but pick a book which describes richly pictures and sounds. So that as I read, I'm forced to create those images and immerse myself in the world of my creation. And the power of creation and concentration, imagination are growing at the same time. So I will say Harry Potter is great for that. Yeah? So, and with this, the power of concentration will grow. And of course, language and other things will benefit also.
May I suggest that we take a break and go and have some tea or some coffee and that you continue your conversations personally? You happy for that, everyone? Yes? So, thank you so much for...
So, there's a session end now?
We haven't. We still
No, for me, my
12.
session ends. Okay?
No, you can carry on.
No, then I would like to say something in closure, if you like. If it's
Sure,
okay.
no,
Yeah,
it's
okay. I started with the big picture of the crisis in human evolution and for humanity. One of the most important things which we must tune into if we are to be effective as change agents in this transition is to align ourselves to the larger, higher truth, the future that is manifesting. We were taught a prayer as children in our school. Make of us the hero warriors that we aspire to become. May we fight successfully the great battle of the future that is to be born, against the past that seeks to endure, so that the new things may manifest and we be ready to receive them. It encapsulates this. There's a future, there's a new consciousness, a new world which is waiting to be born. And then there's an old world which is dying. We're in the transition of an age. And all of these new experiments, new approaches in education, in finance, in society, in every field, even in science, are all attempts of a new consciousness to organize itself. And it has not yet found the vehicles and the means and even the organizational structures. Everything has to be newly built. And that's where we are playing this crucial role. Things that have never been done before have to be done now and new forms created. And it helps if we consciously align ourselves to this new consciousness, to this cosmic purpose. And when we commit ourselves to something greater than ourselves, then the greatness of that fills us with its energy, with its wisdom, with its strength. And we are able to do more than we could on our own. We become, in a sense, instruments of a divine power and a divine purpose. And it's very important for us to remind ourselves of this consciously every day. Why am I here? To serve this evolution, to serve this greater purpose, to serve the divine, whatever the vocabulary that you feel natural. Who am I? I'm a part of this cosmos. I'm a part of the divine consciousness, an emanation, a conscious soul in evolution. Remind yourself of this every day. And you'll find with this, whatever the external circumstances, however difficult they may have appeared to you in the beginning, everything becomes part of something beautiful, a discovery, an adventure, a new exploration, finding new forms, creating new things. And you enjoy every moment of it on a deep level, even as you struggle with circumstances, if they at all seem difficult anymore. They take time perhaps, but they're not difficult. They just need patience and persistence and the skill of finding the right way around the barriers. And the whole perspective changes. It becomes a play, a gigantic cosmic game. In the yogic tradition, we call it Leela, the divine play on earth. But we become conscious participants when we put ourselves in that consciously in that larger context. When we lose that, when we forget that, I am an individual struggling, fighting, and I'm always in tension. And the correction is very easy to do, but we must do it every day consciously. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you so much.
That
was very inspiring, and we've learned a lot from you. Thank you.